In the quiet hush of night, when the world slows and the heart has space to remember, sometimes an old soul learns to beat again. A love that knocks after decades of silence, and the door opens, not out of habit, but out of quiet courage. Whispered Promises at Dusk is a gentle story about love that arrives late in life, when hope feels like a forgotten language, yet still finds its way home. It's for anyone who has ever believed it was too late, only to discover that time never truly closes the heart. Welcome to the warm and peaceful world of Tales of Jaris, where bedtime stories are crafted to soothe your mind, soften the edges of the day, and guide you into calm, restful sleep. Before we begin, one small heartfelt request. Please leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight, your country, your city, or even a tiny personal moment this story brought to mind. It means everything to know which corners of the world these words have reached, which homes they've quietly entered, and whose nights they've gently held. Your single line turns this story from solitary words into a shared journey. Now settle in comfortably. Take a slow, deep breath. Close your eyes if it feels right, and let the tale unfold. It was late afternoon when Ellen Harper stood on the porch of her empty house. The New England autumn had just begun to turn the leaves crimson and gold. A soft chill hung in the air, the kind that settled deep into the bones. She pushed open the front door and stepped inside. The house was silent, as if holding its breath. 20 years ago, this place had echoed with children's laughter and Marie's gentle voice calling everyone to supper. Now only the grandfather clock in the hall ticked steadily. Ellen hung her coat in the closet and walked to the kitchen. She intended to make tea, something warm to chase away the quiet. But her hand paused above the kettle. On the counter sat an old photograph in a simple frame. Marie smiled back at her, eyes bright with the life that cancer had stolen 8 years earlier. Ellen touched the glass lightly with her fingertips. The ache in her chest was familiar, dull and constant, like an old friend who never quite left. She carried the photograph to the living room and sat in the armchair by the window. Outside, the maple tree in the yard dropped another leaf. She had lived alone in this house since Marie's passing. The children, grown now, scattered across the country, called on holidays and sent cards. They worried about her, asked if she was eating, if she needed anything. She always said she was fine. Most days she believed it. But on afternoons like this, when the light slanted low through the windows, the emptiness pressed harder. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the photograph on the side table. She had been 62 when Marie died. Now she was 70. Retired from the library where she had worked for 35 years. The days stretched long and unmarked. She read. She gardened when the weather allowed. She walked to the corner store for milk and bread. Yet something inside her felt unfinished, as though a chapter had ended too soon, and the book refused to close. A soft knock at the front door startled her. She rose slowly, smoothing her sweater, and went to answer it. Through the glass she saw a man standing on the porch. He wore a dark wool coat and held a small paper bag in one hand. His hair was silver, his face lined but kind. When he saw her, he smiled, a small, hesitant smile that carried recognition. Ellen opened the door. "Hello, Ellen," he said quietly. His voice was low and steady. The same voice she had not heard in more than 40 years. "Thomas," she whispered. Thomas Whitaker stood before her, the boy she had loved in college, the man she had not seen since the summer after graduation. He looked older, of course, but the eyes were the same, warm, thoughtful, a little sad. "I was passing through town," he said. "I heard about Marie. I'm so sorry." Ellen nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Would you like to come in?" she asked finally. He hesitated, then stepped across the threshold. The door closed behind him, shutting out the autumn wind. They sat in the living room, one on each end of the old sofa. The photograph of Marie rested between them on the coffee table like a quiet witness. Thomas set the paper bag down carefully. "I brought apple cider from the orchard on Maple Street," he said. "The same place we used to go after classes." Ellen managed a small smile. "You remembered?" "Of course I did." Silence settled again, comfortable yet heavy with years unspoken. Thomas looked around the room. "It's the same house," he said softly. "Almost everything is the same." "Marie liked it that way," Ellen replied. "She said change was fine as long as the important things stayed put." Thomas nodded. He had aged well. Tall still, shoulders broad, despite the slight stoop that came with time. His hands rested on his knees, fingers laced together. "I retired last year," he told her. "Taught history at a small college in Vermont for nearly 4 decades. I always pictured you doing that." "And you?" he asked. "Still reading stories to children who don't exist anymore?" She laughed quietly. "The library closed the children's corner years ago, but I still read to myself." Another pause. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice lower. "I thought about you often, Ellen, after I left." She looked at him. "You had your reasons." "I was young and afraid," he said. "Afraid of making the wrong choice. Afraid of staying in one place too long. I thought running would make me free. And did it? For a while. Then it just made me lonely." Ellen felt something shift inside her. A small crack in the wall she had built around the past. She rose and went to the kitchen. She returned with 2 mugs of hot cider. The steam rose between them like a gentle veil. They sipped in silence for a time. Outside, the sky darkened to the color of slate. "I didn't come to dig up old wounds," Thomas said at last. "I came because I heard you were alone, and because I am too." Ellen set her mug down. "Alone is different when you're 70, she said. "It's quieter, deeper." He nodded. "But it doesn't have to stay that way." She looked at him then, really looked. The years had etched lines around his eyes, but they were lines of laughter and sorrow both. Lines that told a story she had once wanted to share. "Stay for supper," she said suddenly. "I have soup on the stove." Thomas smiled, the same slow smile from long ago. "I'd like that." They ate at the small kitchen table, the one Marie had painted pale blue one spring. The soup was simple, carrots, potatoes, a little thyme. But it tasted like comfort. Thomas told her about his life after college, the teaching job that became his calling, the wife who had passed 5 years earlier from a sudden heart attack, the son who lived in Seattle with his own family. He spoke without self-pity, only quiet honesty. Ellen listened, nodding now and then. When he finished, she told him about Marie's illness, the long months of treatments, the nights spent holding hands in hospital rooms, the way Marie had laughed even at the end, saying she refused to let cancer have the last word. Thomas reached across the table and covered Ellen's hand with his own. His touch was warm, careful. Neither of them pulled away. After supper they moved to the porch. The night air was crisp, stars beginning to appear above the maple tree. They sat side by side on the wooden bench Marie had loved. A blanket lay across their laps. "I used to think time healed everything," Ellen said softly. "Now I think it just teaches us to carry the weight differently." Thomas looked at the sky. "Maybe, but sometimes it brings back pieces we thought were lost." She turned to him. "Are you staying in town long?" "A week," he answered. "I rented a room at the inn on Elm Street." "Then come back tomorrow," she said. "We can walk in the park. The leaves are at their best." He smiled. "I'd like that very much." They sat a while longer, listening to the wind move through the branches. For the first time in years, the silence in Ellen's house felt less like absence and more like waiting. When Thomas finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Thank you for tonight," he said. Ellen met his eyes. "Thank you for coming back." He nodded once, then stepped into the dark. She watched until his figure disappeared down the street. Then she closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. Her heart beat a little faster than usual, not with fear, with something softer, something that had been asleep for a long time. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Ellen woke earlier than usual, the house still wrapped in quiet. She made coffee, stronger than she normally liked, and carried a mug to the porch. The maple leaves glowed against the pale blue sky. She sat on the bench and watched the street. A few neighbors walked dogs or drove to work. None noticed her. She had grown used to being invisible in her own life. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Thomas stood there in a grey sweater and scarf. He carried 2 paper cups from the cafe downtown. "Hot chocolate," he said, "with extra whipped cream. The way you always ordered it back then." Ellen took 1 cup, surprised. "You still remember that? Some things don't fade." They walked together to the park at the end of the street. The path was lined with trees in full autumn colour. Leaves crunched under their shoes. Neither spoke for the first few minutes. The silence felt easy, like an old habit rediscovered. At the pond they stopped. Ducks glided across the water. A child tossed breadcrumbs from the bench nearby. Thomas watched the scene. "I used to bring my son here when he was small," he said. "He loved feeding the ducks." Ellen nodded. "Marie and I came here every Sunday. We'd sit and talk about nothing important. Those are the best conversations," Thomas replied. They sat on a wooden bench facing the pond. The sun warmed their faces. Ellen felt the knot in her chest loosen just a little. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she began, "about not having to stay alone." Thomas turned toward her. "I meant it. But it's not simple," she continued. "We're not 20 anymore. We carry so much." "I know," he said gently. "That's why it matters more now." She looked at the water. A leaf floated down and landed softly. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of hoping again, of losing again." Thomas reached for her hand. This time she let him hold it. His palm was warm, steady. "I'm afraid too," he said, "but I'd rather feel the fear with someone than alone." They sat like that for a long while. The child left. The ducks drifted away. Only the wind moved through the branches. When they finally stood to walk back, Ellen felt lighter, not healed, but less heavy. That week passed in small, careful steps. Thomas came every day. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes they sat on the porch with tea or cider. Once he helped her rake leaves in the yard. They laughed when the rake caught on a root and sent both tumbling into the pile. The sound of their laughter surprised her. It had been years since the house heard anything like it. On Friday evening he arrived with a small wooden box. Inside was an old photograph album. "I found this in storage last year," he explained. "College days. I thought you might want to see." They sat at the kitchen table. Page after page revealed younger versions of themselves. Picnics by the river, late-night study sessions, a black-and-white photo of them dancing at a spring formal. Ellen traced the edge of one picture with her finger. "We look so hopeful," she said. "We were," Thomas answered. He turned the page to a photo of just her. She was laughing, hair blowing in the wind. "I kept this one separate for years," he said quietly. "Why? Because looking at it hurt too much, and because it reminded me what I walked away from." Ellen closed the album. "We can't change what happened," she said. "No," he agreed, "but we can choose what happens next." She looked at him across the table. The lines on his face told their own story. Loss, regret, quiet endurance. "I don't know if I'm ready for more than friendship," she said. "Then friendship is enough," he replied. "For now." They cleared the table together. He washed dishes while she dried. The ordinary act felt intimate. When he left that night, he paused at the door. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow," she said. She watched him walk down the path. The street lamp caught his silver hair. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel the weight of the empty house pressing down. Instead, she felt possibility. Small, fragile, but real. The following Sunday, they drove to the old orchard outside town. Thomas had borrowed a friend's car. The road wound through hills covered in red and orange. They parked near the cider mill. The air smelled of apples and wood smoke. They walked the rows of trees. Some still held fruit. Thomas picked one and handed it to her. It was cool and heavy in her palm. They found a spot under a large tree and sat on a blanket he had brought. He opened a thermos of coffee. They shared it from the same cup. "I used to dream about a life like this," Ellen said. "Simple days, someone to share them with." Thomas looked at the horizon. "I dreamed the same. Then life got complicated." She nodded. "Marie used to say complications make the quiet moments sweeter." She was wise, he said. They ate apples and talked about nothing and everything. The sun moved slowly across the sky. When shadows grew long, they packed up. On the drive back, Ellen felt a quiet certainty settle inside her. Not dramatic, not fireworks, just a gentle knowing. At her door, Thomas turned to her. "I'm leaving for Vermont in 2 days," he said. "My son wants me for Thanksgiving." Ellen's heart tightened. "I understand. But I'll come back," he added quickly. "If you want me to." She looked into his eyes. The same eyes she had loved once. The same eyes that now carried more depth. "I want you to," she said. He smiled. A real smile. One that reached his eyes. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Softly. Briefly. "Good night, Ellen." "Good night, Thomas." She closed the door and leaned against it. Tears came then. Not from sadness. From something deeper. Relief. Gratitude. Hope. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. Thomas left the next morning. Ellen stood at the window and watched his rental car disappear down the street. The house settled back into its familiar quiet. But this time the silence felt different, not empty, waiting. She made herself busy, cleaned the kitchen, raked the last of the leaves, watered the houseplants that had survived another year. In the evenings she read by the lamp. The stories no longer felt like escapes. They felt like company. A week passed, then 2, She began to wonder if the promise had been too fragile, if distance had reminded him of old reasons to stay away. On the third Thursday, the doorbell rang after supper. She opened it expecting the mail carrier. Thomas stood there with a small suitcase and a sheepish smile. "I couldn't wait for Thanksgiving," he said. My son understood. Ellen felt her throat tighten. She stepped aside. "Come in." He set the suitcase by the door. They stood in the hallway for a moment. Neither knew quite what to say. Then he spoke. "I drove all night thinking about what comes next." "And?" she asked. "I want to try," he said simply. "Not rush. Not promise forever yet. Just try." Ellen looked at him. The lines around his eyes were deeper in the lamplight, but the warmth was still there. She reached out and took his hand. "Then we try." They moved to the living room, sat on the sofa. The photograph of Marie watched from the table. Ellen picked it up. "I talk to her sometimes," she said. "Tell her about the day. About you." Thomas nodded. "I talk to my wife too. She'd like you." They sat quietly. The clock ticked. Outside, a light rain began to fall. It tapped against the windows like gentle fingers. Ellen leaned her head on his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They stayed like that until the rain stopped. No words were needed. The simple nearness said enough. Winter came slowly that year. Snow dusted the maple tree in soft white. Thomas stayed in the guest room upstairs. They kept things gentle. Separate beds, shared meals, long talks by the fire. He helped with small things, fixed the creaky stair, insulated the windows against the cold. She taught him her recipe for gingerbread. They laughed when the dough stuck to everything. One evening in December, they walked to the park. The pond had frozen. Children skated in circles under strings of lights. Thomas and Ellen sat on the same bench, bundled in coats and scarves. Their breath made white clouds. "I never thought I'd feel this again," Ellen said. "Warm inside when it's freezing out." Thomas squeezed her hand through their gloves. "Me neither." They watched the skaters. A little girl fell, and her father helped her up. She laughed and tried again. Ellen thought of her own children. They had called last week, surprised but glad to hear about Thomas. Her daughter had said, "Mom, you sound happy." She had not known how to answer, but it was true. She was happy, not the wild joy of youth, a quieter one, deeper, more earned. They walked home slowly. The snow crunched underfoot. At the door, Thomas stopped. "Ellen," he said. She turned. "I love you," he told her. The words hung in the cold air. Simple, honest. She felt tears sting her eyes, not from sorrow, from the relief of hearing them. "I love you too," she whispered. He pulled her close. They stood on the porch, snow falling around them. The world felt small and safe. Spring arrived with soft green buds on the maple. Thomas had not left. His things had slowly moved from the guest room to hers. They shared the bed now, not with urgency, with tenderness, the way two people who had lived long lives knew how. They planted a garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, herbs, a row of sunflowers for Marie. Ellen said it felt right. Thomas agreed. One afternoon they sat on the porch swing. The air smelled of fresh earth and lilacs. Ellen held a letter from her son. He was coming to visit in June, with his wife and the grandchildren. Thomas read it over her shoulder. "Family," he said. "Yes." They rocked gently. The swing creaked in rhythm. "I'm not afraid any more," Ellen said. "Of what?" "Of tomorrow. Of losing again. I know it will happen some day. But until then I have this. She gestured to the garden, to him, to the house that no longer echoed with emptiness. Thomas kissed her temple. "We have this." The sun dipped lower. Golden light spread across the yard. A breeze moved through the new leaves. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade. Whispered promises had become spoken ones, and in the quiet of that spring evening, two hearts that had once been broken found a way to heal together. Summer arrived with long warm days and the hum of cicadas in the trees. Ellen and Thomas fell into a gentle routine. Mornings began with coffee on the porch. Afternoons were spent in the garden or reading side by side. Evenings ended with quiet walks around the neighborhood. They spoke often of the past, not to dwell, but to understand. One evening in July they sat under the stars. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. Ellen held a cup of chamomile tea. Thomas had his usual black coffee. "I've been thinking about the future," she said. He looked at her. "What kind of future? One where we don't just visit each other's lives." He set his cup down. "You mean living together? For good?" "Yes." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for her hand. "I've wanted that since the day I knocked on your door. But I didn't want to push." "You're not pushing," she said. "I'm asking." He smiled, the kind of smile that made the years between them feel small. "Then yes," he answered. "Let's make this home ours." They talked late into the night, about moving his books from Vermont, about selling his small apartment there, about telling their children, about the simple joy of waking up together every day. When they finally went inside, the house felt fuller, not because of things, but because of shared breath, shared dreams, shared tomorrows. Autumn returned the following year. The maple tree turned the same brilliant red and gold. This time Ellen did not face it alone. Thomas raked leaves beside her. They laughed when a gust sent a shower of color over their heads. Her son and his family came for a weekend visit. The grandchildren ran through the yard. Their voices filled the empty spaces. Thomas played catch with the boys. Ellen baked pies with her daughter-in-law. At dinner the table was crowded. Stories flowed easily. No one mentioned the years of quiet. Only the present mattered. After the family left, Ellen and Thomas sat on the porch swing. The evening was cool. A blanket draped over their knees. "I never thought family could grow again," she said. Thomas nodded. "Neither did I." They rocked slowly. The swing creaked in familiar rhythm. "I'm grateful," Ellen whispered, "for every day." "Me too," he replied. They watched the sun set behind the trees. The sky turned soft pink and lavender. Dusk wrapped around them like a promise kept. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. Just two people who had found each other again and chosen to stay. Years passed in the gentle way time moves for those who have learned to savor it. The garden expanded. Sunflowers stood tall each summer. The house gathered more photographs of grandchildren, of quiet moments, of hands held on the porch. Ellen's health remained steady. Thomas had a knee that ached in winter, but they managed. Doctor's visits, morning stretches, small adjustments. They never pretended life was perfect. They simply lived it together. One winter evening, snow falling thick and silent, they sat by the fire. Ellen rested her head on his shoulder. "Remember the first time you came back?" she asked. "Like it was yesterday," he said. "I was so afraid you'd leave again. I was afraid you'd ask me to." She lifted her head, looked into his eyes. "I love you more now than I did then." He kissed her forehead. "And I love you more every day." They stayed by the fire until the logs burned low. Outside, the snow continued. Inside, the warmth held. Two hearts, once lonely, now full. The clock ticked softly, marking time that no longer felt borrowed, but shared, forever in the quiet moments, in the whispered promises at dusk. Winter deepened, and the snow lay thick on the ground like a soft white blanket over the world. Ellen and Thomas spent most days indoors now, the cold keeping them close to the fireplace. They had developed a new ritual. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock, Thomas would make hot cocoa the old-fashioned way, with real chocolate melted slowly on the stove, a pinch of cinnamon, and just enough cream to make it rich. Ellen would set out 2 mugs and a plate of shortbread cookies she had baked the day before. They sat together in the living room, the fire crackling, the windows fogged with their breath. Thomas read aloud from books they both loved, Jane Austen, Willa Cather, sometimes poetry by Mary Oliver. His voice had grown softer over the months, more measured, as though each word carried extra weight now that time felt more precious. Ellen listened with her eyes half closed, letting the stories wrap around her like another blanket. One grey afternoon in January, as snow swirled outside, Thomas closed the book he had been reading. He looked at Ellen for a long moment. "I've been thinking about something," he said quietly. She set her mug down. "What is it?" "I want to ask you to marry me." The words hung in the warm air between them. Ellen felt her heart skip once, then settle, not with surprise exactly, more with the gentle recognition that this moment had been coming for a long time. She studied his face. The familiar lines, the steady eyes, the small tremor in his hands that he tried to hide by clasping them together. "You don't have to answer right away," he continued quickly. I know we're old. I know we've both said vows before, but I want to say them again. With you." Ellen reached across the small space and took both his hands in hers. They were cool from holding the mug, but warmed quickly under her touch. "Thomas," she said, "I've spent so many years believing that part of life was over for me. That love like this belonged to younger people, to stories in books." She paused, searching for the right words. "But you came back, and you stayed, and every day since then has felt like a gift I didn't know I could still receive." Tears gathered in her eyes, but they were soft tears, the kind that come from fullness rather than loss. "Yes," she whispered, "I will marry you." Thomas exhaled as though he had been holding his breath for years. He leaned forward and kissed her, slowly, tenderly, the way people kiss when they know time is no longer endless, but still beautiful. They sat there a long while, foreheads touching, hands clasped. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire burned steady. 2 lives that had once diverged had come full circle, and now they would walk the last stretch together. The wedding was small and quiet, just as they wanted. It took place on a clear spring morning in April, in the little white chapel at the edge of town. Only their children and a handful of close friends attended. Ellen wore a simple cream dress she had found in a second-hand shop. Nothing fancy, but the fabric felt soft against her skin, and the colour caught the light like morning mist. Thomas wore a dark grey suit he had owned for decades, the one he saved for special days. The minister was an old friend of Ellen's from the library days. He spoke gently about love that arrives late, about second chances that feel like first chances all over again. When they exchanged rings, simple gold bands they had chosen together, the minister smiled. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Thomas lifted Ellen's hand to his lips and kissed it. The small group clapped softly. Afterward, they held a reception in the backyard. Tables set under the maple tree, now covered in fresh green leaves. Cookie trays of sandwiches, fruit, and the gingerbread they both loved. A single violinist played quiet tunes from the porch. Grandchildren ran barefoot across the grass. Ellen and Thomas sat side by side on the swing, watching it all. Her daughter came over and hugged them both. "You look happy, Mom," she said. "I am," Ellen replied. Truly, as the sun began to lower, the guests drifted away. Only the two of them remained. They walked slowly through the garden. Sunflowers stood tall, their heads turned toward the light. Thomas stopped beside the row Ellen had planted in memory of Marie. He touched one bloom gently. "Thank you," he said to the flowers. Or perhaps to the woman who had once loved Ellen so well. Ellen slipped her arm through his. They walked back to the porch as dusk settled. The sky turned the same soft pink and lavender it had the night he first told her he loved her again. They sat on the bench, a blanket across their laps. No words for a long time. Then Ellen spoke. "We made it," she said. Thomas nodded. "We did." They watched the last light fade. Whispers of promises, once fragile, now solid as the earth beneath them. Two hearts that had known sorrow, now knew peace. The years that followed moved with the gentle rhythm of seasons turning. Summers brought grandchildren for long visits, their laughter filling the house once more. Autumns were spent raking leaves and baking pies. Winters meant fireside reading and hot cocoa at 4. Springs arrived with new plantings and the smell of fresh earth. Ellen's health remained good, though her knees ached more in damp weather. Thomas's hearing faded slowly, but he still read to her every afternoon. They never stopped holding hands, never stopped saying good night. One evening in late autumn, years later, they sat on the porch as always. The maple leaves fell in slow spirals around them. Ellen rested her head on Thomas's shoulder. "I'm tired tonight," she said softly. He kissed the top of her head. "Then rest, my love." She closed her eyes. The wind moved through the branches. A single leaf landed on her lap. Thomas covered her hand with his. They sat in silence as dusk deepened. Two lives intertwined, two hearts healed, two souls who had found each other when the world thought it was too late. The house glowed softly behind them. Inside, photographs smiled from every wall. Outside, the night was kind. And in that quiet, under the falling leaves, whispered promises became eternal, forever held in the gentle space between one breath and the next. The maple tree stood taller each year, its branches spreading wider like arms that had learned to embrace more of the sky. Ellen and Thomas grew older together in the quiet way that time allows, when two people no longer fight against it. Their mornings began the same. Coffee brewing, birds calling from the garden, sunlight slanting through the kitchen window onto the table where they sat close enough for their knees to touch beneath it. Thomas's hands trembled more now when he poured the coffee, but Ellen would steady the pot with her own, their fingers brushing in a small, unspoken ritual of care. They spoke less of grand plans and more of small memories. The way the grandchildren's laughter had echoed last summer, the taste of the first tomato from their garden that year, The night they had danced slowly in the living room to an old record, neither quite steady on their feet, but both unwilling to stop. One crisp October morning, Ellen woke before Thomas. She slipped from bed quietly, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and went to the porch. The air carried the sharp scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. She sat on the bench and watched the world wake. A neighbor walked by with his dog. He waved. She waved back. For so many years she had felt unseen. Now even small gestures felt like connection. Thomas appeared at the door a little while later. He moved slower these days, leaning on the frame for support. "Good morning, love," he said. His voice was thinner but still warm. She smiled. "Good morning." He joined her on the bench. They sat in silence for a long time, watching leaves drift, watching clouds move across a pale blue sky. "I've been thinking," Thomas said at last, "about what we leave behind." Ellen turned to him. "What do you mean?" "Not things, not money or houses." He paused, searching for words. "Moments. The way we loved each other. The way we learned to be kind again." She reached for his hand. "We've left plenty of those." He nodded slowly. "I want our children to know that love doesn't end when youth does, that it can begin again even when the world says it's too late." Ellen squeezed his hand. "They'll know, because they've seen us live it." They sat until the sun climbed higher. Then Thomas stood carefully. "Help me with the rake today?" he asked. She rose beside him. "Always." They worked side by side in the yard, raking leaves into piles, pausing often to catch their breath, laughing when a gust sent the piles scattering again. It was slow work, but it was theirs, and in the doing of it they felt alive. Years later, when the grandchildren were grown and had children of their own, they still came back to the house under the maple tree. The porch swing still creaked in the same rhythm. The garden still bloomed each spring. Inside, photographs covered the walls. Snapshots of two people who had found each other twice. Ellen passed quietly one winter night, surrounded by family. Thomas holding her hand until the very end. He followed her 3 months later, slipping away in his sleep with the same gentle peace he had carried since the day he returned. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery at the edge of town. A simple stone marked their place. The inscription read, "Whispered promises kept. Forever at dusk." The house passed to their daughter. She kept it just as it was. The maple tree grew older too, its roots deep, its shade wide. Every autumn visitors, family friends, sometimes strangers who had heard the story, came to sit on the porch bench. They looked at the leaves falling. They thought about love that arrives late, about healing that happens slowly, about two hearts that refuse to stay broken. And in the quiet of those moments, under the same golden light that had once fallen on Ellen and Thomas, something lingered. Not ghosts, not sorrow, but a gentle reminder that even when the years feel long and the nights feel empty, a knock at the door can change everything. That love, when it comes again, comes wiser, kinder, more patient, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin when the world thinks the book is already closed. The whispers at dusk became legend, passed from one generation to the next, a quiet promise that it is never too late to open the heart again, never too late to let someone in, never too late to find home. And that was Whispered Promises at Dusk. a soft reminder that love keeps no schedule. Healing walks at its own gentle pace. And the most beautiful chapters often begin long after we thought the story had ended. If this tale wrapped your heart in quiet comfort, if it stirred a memory or a feeling you hadn't touched in a while, please share in the comments. What country and city are you in tonight? What emotion or thought did this story leave with you? Or simply write one word that captures what it meant to you. Your words make Tales of Jaris feel like a warm, shared space. If this peaceful journey brought you rest, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and return for the next soothing bedtime story. Tales of Jaris, where nights are gentle, stories are kind, and hearts find their way back to calm. Good night, and may your dreams be soft and kind.